In the spring of 30 AD, during the Jewish festival of Passover, something happened in Jerusalem that split human history in two. A man was executed. Not a king, not a military leader, not a political revolutionary in the conventional sense. Just a traveling teacher from Nazareth who had spent 3 years walking through the villages of Galilee and Judea, healing the sick, teaching about the kingdom of God, and claiming to be the Son of God himself. His death should have been the end of his story. Roman crucifixion was designed to be final, brutal, and definitive. It was Rome's way of saying, "This is what happens to those who challenge our authority." Thousands were crucified throughout the empire. Their names were forgotten. Their movements died with them. Their followers scattered. But this death was different. This execution became the most analyzed, most discussed, most significant event in human history. Christians claim it was not the end, but the purpose. Not a tragedy, but a victory. Not defeat, but salvation. The final week of Jesus' life, from his triumphal entry into Jerusalem to his resurrection from the dead, contains some of the most dramatic moments in the Bible. Crowds shouting his praise would soon demand his crucifixion. Disciples pledging loyalty would flee in terror. Religious leaders who claimed to serve God would condemn the Messiah they claimed to be waiting for. A Roman governor who found him innocent would order his execution. And a death that seemed to end everything would instead prove to be the beginning. What actually happened during those final days? Not the sanitized Sunday school version, not the theological abstractions, but the real events day by day, hour by hour, as recorded in the four Gospels. The political pressures, the religious tensions, the human emotions, the physical suffering, the spiritual warfare, the cosmic implications of what was unfolding in one small corner of the Roman Empire. This is not just ancient history. Christians believe these events determine the eternal destiny of every person who has ever lived. They claim that what happened in Jerusalem during Passover week in 30 AD was the fulfillment of prophecies written hundreds of years earlier, the accomplishment of God's plan to reconcile humanity to himself, the payment for human sin, and the defeat of death itself. The story spans 8 days. From Sunday, when Jesus rode into Jerusalem on a donkey while crowds welcomed him as king, to Sunday, when he walked out of a tomb alive, having conquered death. Each day brought dramatic developments. Each event carried layers of meaning. Each moment moved toward the climax that would define Christianity. The four gospel writers, Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John, each recorded these events from different perspectives, emphasizing different details, preserving different conversations. Together, their accounts create a comprehensive picture of the most important week in history. This is what really happened in the final days of Jesus, day by day, event by event, from triumph to betrayal, from arrest to trial, from torture to execution, from death to resurrection, the week that changed everything. Sunday, the triumphal entry. The road from Jericho to Jerusalem climbs steadily upward through the Judean wilderness. It rises nearly 3,500 feet over 17 miles of rocky, dangerous terrain. This was the route pilgrims took when traveling to Jerusalem for the festivals. In the spring of 30 AD, thousands were making this journey for Passover, the most important celebration in the Jewish calendar. Jesus had been traveling toward Jerusalem for months. He had set his face toward the city, Luke records, knowing what awaited him there. His disciples sensed something significant was about to happen, though they did not understand what. The crowds following him had grown. The excitement was building. Many believed he was about to establish his kingdom, to drive out the Romans, to restore Israel to glory. On Friday, 6 days before Passover, Jesus arrived in Bethany, a village about 2 miles from Jerusalem. His friends Mary, Martha, and Lazarus lived there. This was the same Lazarus whom Jesus had raised from the dead just weeks earlier. That miracle had caused a sensation. People were coming from Jerusalem just to see Lazarus, living proof of Jesus' power over death. On Saturday, the Sabbath, Jesus rested in Bethany. But Saturday evening, after the Sabbath ended, Simon the leper hosted a dinner for Jesus. During the meal, Mary took a pound of expensive ointment made from pure nard, worth about a year's wages for a common laborer, and anointed Jesus' feet with it. Then she wiped his feet with her hair. The house filled with the fragrance. Judas Iscariot, one of the 12 disciples, objected. Why was this ointment not sold for 300 denarii and given to the poor? John's Gospel notes that Judas said this not because he cared about the poor, but because he was a thief. He kept the money bag and used to help himself to what was put into it. Jesus defended Mary's action. Leave her alone, so that she may keep it for the day of my burial. For the poor you always have with you, but you do not always have me. Mary, whether she fully understood it or not, was preparing Jesus' body for burial. Within 5 days, he would be dead. Sunday morning arrived. Jesus sent 2 disciples ahead to a village with specific instructions. Go into the village in front of you, and immediately you will find a donkey tied and a colt with her. Untie them and bring them to me. If anyone says anything to you, you shall say, the Lord needs them, and he will send them at once. This fulfilled a prophecy written by Zechariah 500 years earlier. Rejoice greatly, O daughter of Zion. Shout aloud, O daughter of Jerusalem. Behold, your king is coming to you. Righteous and having salvation is he, humble and mounted on a donkey, on a colt, the foal of a donkey. Kings rode horses when going to war. They rode donkeys when coming in peace. By choosing a donkey, Jesus was making a statement. He was entering Jerusalem as a king, but not the kind of king the people expected. Not a military conqueror, but a peaceful ruler. Not leading an army, but offering salvation. The disciples brought the donkey and colt. They put their cloaks on them, and Jesus sat on them. As he began the descent from the Mount of Olives toward Jerusalem, a large crowd gathered. They had heard he was coming. Word had spread about the raising of Lazarus. Excitement was at fever pitch. The crowd began to act as if welcoming royalty. They spread their cloaks on the road. They cut branches from palm trees and laid them on the path. This was the reception given to kings. When Jehu had been anointed king of Israel centuries earlier, the people had spread their garments under him on the bare steps and blown the trumpet, proclaiming him king. Then the shouting began. Hosanna to the Son of David. Blessed is he who comes in the name of the Lord. Hosanna in the highest. They were quoting Psalm 118, a messianic psalm used during Passover. Hosanna meant save now or save, we pray. They were hailing Jesus as the Messiah, the Son of David, the one who would restore Israel's kingdom. Some in the crowd shouted, Blessed is the coming kingdom of our father David. Others cried out, Blessed is the King of Israel. The entire crowd, swollen with Passover pilgrims, was proclaiming Jesus as king. The Pharisees in the crowd were alarmed. This was open sedition against Rome. This kind of demonstration could bring down Roman military force on the entire city. They pushed through to Jesus and demanded, Teacher, rebuke your disciples. Jesus answered, I tell you, if these were silent, the very stones would cry out. The moment was prophetically ordained. It could not be stopped. Even if the people were silenced, creation itself would proclaim what was happening. As Jesus came over the crest of the Mount of Olives and Jerusalem came into view, he stopped. The city spread before him, the temple gleaming in the morning sun, the walls strong and imposing, the houses packed together. He looked at the city and wept. Would that you, even you, had known on this day the things that make for peace, but now they are hidden from your eyes. For the days will come upon you, when your enemies will set up a barricade around you and surround you and hem you in on every side and tear you down to the ground, you and your children within you. And they will not leave one stone upon another in you, because you did not know the time of your visitation. He was weeping over Jerusalem's coming destruction. Within 40 years, Roman armies would besiege the city. The temple would be destroyed. The population would be slaughtered or enslaved. All because they did not recognize the Messiah when he came to them. The procession continued down into the Kidron Valley, across the brook, and up through the gates into Jerusalem. The entire city was stirred. People asked, Who is this? The crowds answered, This is the prophet Jesus from Nazareth of Galilee. Jesus went straight to the temple. He looked around at everything, taking it all in. The merchants selling animals for sacrifice. The money changers exchanging foreign coins for the temple currency, the noise, the commerce, the corruption, But because it was already late, he did not act then. He returned to Bethany with the 12 disciples for the night. The day had been a triumph. Jesus had entered Jerusalem as a king. The crowds had proclaimed him Messiah. The prophecies were being fulfilled. But Jesus knew what the crowds did not. This was not the beginning of an earthly kingdom. It was the beginning of the end. In 5 days, he would be dead. Monday, cleansing the temple. Monday morning, Jesus and the disciples left Bethany and headed back toward Jerusalem. Jesus was hungry. He saw a fig tree in leaf by the side of the road and went to it, looking for fruit. But though the tree had leaves, it had no figs. Only leaves. Jesus spoke to the tree, "May no one ever eat fruit from you again." The disciples heard him say it, but did not fully understand. The fig tree was a symbol. Israel had the outward appearance of fruitfulness, the leaves of religious activity, but produced no actual fruit of righteousness. Judgment was coming. They continued on to Jerusalem. Jesus entered the temple courts, and this time he did not simply observe. He acted. He began driving out those who sold and those who bought in the temple. He overturned the tables of the money changers and the seats of those who sold pigeons. He would not allow anyone to carry anything through the temple courts. This was no minor disturbance. The temple complex was enormous, covering about 35 acres. The court of the Gentiles, the outer court where this commerce took place, was the size of several football fields. Jesus was not just making a symbolic gesture, he was shutting down the temple's economic system. The money changers were there because the temple tax had to be paid in a specific currency. Foreign coins bearing the images of pagan gods or Roman emperors were not acceptable. So pilgrims had to exchange their money, and the money changers charged fees, making profit from those coming to worship God. The animal sellers were there because Jews traveling long distances could not easily bring their own animals for sacrifice. So they bought them at the temple. But the priests would often reject animals brought from outside, forcing people to buy from the temple vendors at inflated prices. The whole system had become corrupt, exploiting the poor and turning worship into commerce. Jesus quoted 2 Old Testament passages as he cleared the temple. First, Isaiah, "Is it not written, 'My house shall be called a house of prayer for all the nations'?" Then Jeremiah, "But you have made it a den of robbers." The court of the Gentiles was supposed to be a place where non-Jews could come to worship the God of Israel, to pray, to seek him. Instead, it had become a marketplace, noisy and chaotic, making genuine worship nearly impossible. The religious leaders had prioritized profit over people, money over mission. The chief priests and scribes heard about this and began seeking a way to destroy him. They feared him because the whole crowd was astonished at his teaching, but they could not act openly. Jesus had popular support. The people were amazed by him. Any move against him would have to be done carefully. Jesus spent the day teaching in the temple. The blind and lame came to him there, and he healed them. Children ran through the temple court shouting, "Hosanna to the Son of David." The chief priests and scribes were indignant. They demanded of Jesus, "Do you hear what these are saying?" Jesus answered, "Yes. Have you never read, 'Out of the mouth of infants and nursing babies you have prepared praise'?" He was quoting Psalm 8. The religious experts, who claimed to know Scripture, were rejecting the Messiah, but children in their simple faith recognized him. As evening came, Jesus left the city again. The pattern was established. He would teach in Jerusalem during the day but leave at night. This was partly for safety. His enemies were plotting against him. But it was also because his time had not yet come. He was following a divine timetable. Everything would happen according to plan. That night back in Bethany, the question must have hung in the air among the disciples. What was Jesus doing? He had entered Jerusalem as a king. The crowds loved him. His power was undeniable. His teaching was authoritative. The miracles proved his identity. Why did he keep leaving? Why did he provoke the religious leaders? Why did he not seize power while he had popular support? They did not understand. They were thinking of an earthly kingdom. Jesus was accomplishing something far greater. He was not there to overthrow Rome. He was there to defeat sin and death itself. And that required not seizing power, but surrendering it. Not living, but dying. Not victory in the world's terms, but victory through sacrifice. Tuesday, teaching and confrontation. Early Tuesday morning, as they passed by the fig tree Jesus had cursed the day before, Peter noticed something remarkable. The tree had withered from the roots up. It was completely dead. Peter exclaimed, "Rabbi, look! The fig tree that you cursed has withered." Jesus used this as a teaching moment about faith. Have faith in God. Truly I say to you, whoever says to this mountain, "Be taken up and thrown into the sea," and does not doubt in his heart, but believes that what he says will come to pass, it will be done for him. Therefore I tell you, whatever you ask in prayer, believe that you have received it, and it will be done for you. He was not teaching a formula for getting whatever you want. He was revealing the power of faith aligned with God's will. The fig tree represented Israel's spiritual deadness. It had been judged. The mountains that needed removing were the obstacles to God's purposes. Faith meant trusting God's plan, even when it did not match human expectations. They entered Jerusalem and went to the temple. Jesus began teaching, and almost immediately, the chief priests, scribes, and elders confronted him. They demanded, "By what authority are you doing these things, or who gave you this authority to do them?" It was a legitimate question in their minds. Jesus had no formal rabbinical training, he held no official position, he had not been appointed by any religious body, yet he was teaching in the temple, overturning centuries of tradition, claiming to speak for God. Where did he get the authority? Jesus answered with his own question. "I will ask you one question. Answer me, and I will tell you by what authority I do these things. Was the baptism of John from heaven or from man? Answer me." This put them in an impossible position. If they said John's baptism was from heaven, Jesus would ask why they did not believe him, since John had testified about Jesus. If they said it was from man, the people would turn against them, because everyone believed John was a true prophet. They had to admit, "We do not know." Jesus responded, "Neither will I tell you by what authority I do these things." He had exposed their dishonesty. They did not care about truth or authority. They cared about protecting their power. They would not acknowledge the obvious because it threatened their position. Then Jesus told a series of parables, each one an indictment of the religious leaders. He told of a man with 2 sons. He asked one to work in the vineyard. The son refused but later changed his mind and went. He asked the other son, who agreed to go but never did. Jesus asked which son did the father's will. The religious leaders admitted it was the first son. Jesus declared, "Truly I say to you, the tax collectors and the prostitutes go into the kingdom of God before you. For John came to you in the way of righteousness, and you did not believe him, but the tax collectors and the prostitutes believed him. And even when you saw it, you did not afterward change your minds and believe him." The outcasts of society were entering God's kingdom ahead of the religious elite. Why? Because they recognized their need, they repented, they believed. The religious leaders, confident in their own righteousness, refused to acknowledge their spiritual bankruptcy. Jesus told another parable. A master planted a vineyard, built a winepress and a tower, leased it to tenants, and went to another country. When harvest time came, he sent servants to collect the fruit. The tenants beat one servant, killed another, stoned a third. The master sent more servants, and they were treated the same way. Finally, he sent his son, thinking they would respect him. But the tenants said, "This is the heir. Come, let us kill him and have his inheritance." They seized him, threw him out of the vineyard, and killed him. Jesus asked, "When therefore the owner of the vineyard comes, what will he do to those tenants?" The religious leaders answered correctly, "He will put those wretches to a miserable death, and let out the vineyard to other tenants who will give him the fruits in their seasons." Jesus quoted Psalm 118. "The stone that the builders rejected has become the cornerstone. This was the Lord's doing, and it is marvelous in our eyes." Then he made the meaning explicit. "Therefore I tell you, the kingdom of God will be taken away from you and given to a people producing its fruits. And the one who falls on this stone will be broken to pieces, and when it falls on anyone, it will crush him." The religious leaders understood that he was speaking about them. They were the tenants who had killed the prophets God sent. Now they were about to kill God's Son. Judgment was coming. The kingdom would be taken from them and given to others. They wanted to arrest him immediately, but they feared the crowds, who still considered Jesus a prophet. So they left him and plotted how they might trap him in his words. They sent some Pharisees and Herodians to Jesus with a question designed to be a trap. "Teacher, we know that you are true and do not care about anyone's opinion. For you are not swayed by appearances but truly teach the way of God. Is it lawful to pay taxes to Caesar or not? Should we pay them or should we not?" This was brilliant strategy. If Jesus said yes, pay taxes to Rome, the people would turn against him as a collaborator with the occupying power. If he said no, do not pay taxes, the Romans would arrest him for sedition. Either answer seemed to doom him. Jesus saw through their hypocrisy. "Why put me to the test? Bring me a denarius and let me look at it." They brought him a Roman coin. He asked, "Whose likeness and inscription is this?" They answered, "Caesar's." Jesus said, "Render to Caesar the things that are Caesar's, and to God the things that are God's." They marveled at his answer. He had escaped their trap while teaching a profound truth. Give to human government what belongs to it. Give to God what belongs to him. And since everything ultimately belongs to God, including ourselves made in his image, this meant total devotion to God while still respecting human authority. The Sadducees came next. They did not believe in resurrection or angels, focusing only on the first 5 books of Moses as authoritative. They posed a hypothetical question about a woman who married 7 brothers in succession, each dying before producing children, following the law of levirate marriage. In the resurrection when they rise again, whose wife will she be? For the 7 had her as wife. Jesus answered, "Is this not the reason you are wrong, because you know neither the scriptures nor the power of God? For when they rise from the dead, they neither marry nor are given in marriage, but are like angels in heaven." Then he proved the resurrection from the Torah itself. "And as for the dead being raised, have you not read in the book of Moses, in the passage about the bush, how God spoke to him saying, 'I am the God of Abraham, and the God of Isaac, and the God of Jacob'? He is not God of the dead, but of the living. You are quite wrong." The crowd was astonished at his teaching. One scribe, impressed by how well Jesus had answered, asked, "Which commandment is the most important of all?" Jesus answered, "The most important is, 'Hear, O Israel, the Lord our God, the Lord is one, and you shall love the Lord your God with all your heart, and with all your soul, and with all your mind, and with all your strength.' The second is this, 'You shall love your neighbor as yourself.' There is no other commandment greater than these." The scribe agreed enthusiastically. "You are right, teacher. You have truly said that he is one, and there is no other besides him. And to love him with all the heart, and with all the understanding, and with all the strength, and to love one's neighbor as oneself, is much more than all whole burnt offerings and sacrifices." Jesus saw that he answered wisely and said to him, "You are not far from the kingdom of God." After that, no one dared to ask him any more questions. Then Jesus turned the tables. He asked his own question, "How can the scribes say that the Christ is the son of David? David himself in the Holy Spirit declared, 'The Lord said to my Lord, sit at my right hand until I put your enemies under your feet.' David himself calls him Lord, so how is he his son?" The point was profound. The Messiah was David's son, descended from David's line, but David called him Lord, showing the Messiah was more than just a human descendant. He was divine. Jesus was revealing his own identity. He was both David's son and David's Lord, both human and divine. The large crowd listened to him with delight, but Jesus had stern warnings for the scribes and Pharisees. "Beware of the scribes, who like to walk around in long robes and like greetings in the marketplaces, and have the best seats in the synagogues and the places of honor at feasts, who devour widows' houses, and for a pretense make long prayers. They will receive the greater condemnation." Jesus sat down opposite the treasury and watched people putting money into the offering box. Many rich people put in large sums. A poor widow came and put in 2 small copper coins, worth less than a penny. Jesus called his disciples and said, "Truly I say to you, this poor widow has put in more than all those who are contributing to the offering box, for they all contributed out of their abundance, but she, out of her poverty, has put in everything she had, all she had to live on. She gave everything. The rich gave from their surplus. She gave sacrificially, trusting God completely. This was true devotion, the kind of heart God desired. As they left the temple that evening, the disciples marveled at the massive stones and magnificent buildings. One disciple said, "Look, teacher, what wonderful stones and what wonderful buildings." Jesus responded, "Do you see these great buildings? There will not be left here one stone upon another that will not be thrown down." They walked to the Mount of Olives, across the valley from the temple. As they sat there looking at the temple gleaming in the late afternoon sun, Peter, James, John, and Andrew asked Jesus privately, "Tell us, when will these things be? And what will be the sign when all these things are about to be accomplished?" Jesus gave them the longest prophetic discourse recorded in the Gospels, now known as the Olivet Discourse. He warned them about false messiahs, wars, earthquakes, famines. He told them they would be persecuted, betrayed, hated. He spoke of the abomination of desolation standing where it ought not to be. He described great tribulation unlike anything in history. He promised that the gospel would be proclaimed to all nations before the end came. And he described his own return. But in those days, after that tribulation, the sun will be darkened, and the moon will not give its light, and the stars will be falling from heaven, and the powers in the heavens will be shaken. And then they will see the Son of Man coming in clouds with great power and glory. And then he will send out the angels and gather his elect from the four winds, from the ends of the earth to the ends of heaven. He told them parables about watchfulness, about being ready, about faithful service while the master was away. He warned them about the danger of falling asleep spiritually. The day and hour were unknown. They must stay alert. As the sun set over Jerusalem, Jesus finished his teaching. "You know that after 2 days the Passover is coming and the Son of Man will be delivered up to be crucified." 2 days. In 48 hours, the events that would change history forever would begin. The time was coming. Everything was about to happen. That same evening, while Jesus was on the Mount of Olives preparing his disciples, the chief priests and elders were gathering at the palace of Caiaphas the high priest. They were plotting how to arrest Jesus by stealth and kill him. But they agreed it should not be during the feast, to avoid a riot among the people. What they did not know was that the solution to their problem was about to walk through the door. Wednesday, the betrayal is set. The Gospel writers are silent about Wednesday. No events are recorded, no teachings preserved, no confrontations described. This silence itself is significant. It was the calm before the storm, the final pause before the whirlwind. Jesus likely spent the day in Bethany with his friends. Perhaps he rested. Perhaps he prayed. Perhaps he simply savored these last hours of peace before the suffering began. The disciples may have sensed something coming but could not imagine what. But while Jesus rested, his enemies were active. And one of his own disciples was about to commit the ultimate act of betrayal. Judas Iscariot, one of the 12, went to the chief priests. Matthew records his words simply, "What will you give me if I deliver him over to you?" It was a transaction, a business deal. Judas was selling his master. The chief priests were delighted. They had been looking for a way to arrest Jesus away from the crowds. Now one of his inner circle was offering to hand him over. They counted out 30 pieces of silver, the price of a slave according to Exodus 21:32. Judas agreed to the terms. From that moment, he sought an opportunity to betray Jesus when the crowds were not around. Why did Judas do it? The Gospels give hints but no complete explanation. John says Judas was a thief who used to help himself from the money bag. Perhaps he was disappointed that Jesus was not establishing an earthly kingdom. Perhaps he thought Jesus was going to get them all killed and wanted to save himself. Perhaps he was trying to force Jesus' hand to make him use his power to establish his kingdom. Perhaps it was simple greed. Perhaps Satan had entered into him, as Luke explicitly states. Whatever the reason, the betrayal was set. One of the 12, who had walked with Jesus for 3 years, who had seen the miracles, heard the teachings, witnessed the glory, was going to hand him over to his enemies for the price of a slave. Jesus knew. He had known all along. At the Last Supper he would say, The Son of Man goes as it is written of him, but woe to that man by whom the Son of Man is betrayed. It would have been better for that man if he had not been born." Wednesday passed quietly. But beneath the surface, forces were aligning. The religious leaders had their plan. Judas had made his deal. The stage was set. In less than 48 hours, Jesus would be dead. Thursday, the Last Supper. Thursday dawned, the 14th of Nisan on the Jewish calendar. This was the day of preparation, when the Passover lambs would be slaughtered in the temple. By evening, every Jewish household in Jerusalem would gather to celebrate Passover, remembering how God had delivered Israel from slavery in Egypt through the blood of lambs painted on doorposts. Jesus sent Peter and John into the city with specific instructions. "Go and prepare the Passover for us, that we may eat it." They asked where they should prepare it. Jesus gave them detailed directions that showed he had arranged this beforehand. "Behold, when you have entered the city, a man carrying a jar of water will meet you. Follow him into the house that he enters, and tell the master of the house, 'The teacher says to you, where is the guest room, where I may eat the Passover with my disciples?' And he will show you a large upper room furnished. Prepare it there." Peter and John went and found everything exactly as Jesus had told them. The man with the water jar, the house, the upper room. They prepared the Passover meal. As evening came, Jesus arrived with the 12 disciples. They reclined at the table in the upper room. The atmosphere must have been strange. The disciples sensed something was happening but did not understand what. Jesus knew exactly what the next 24 hours would bring. During the meal, Jesus stood up, laid aside his outer garments, wrapped a towel around his waist, poured water into a basin, and began to wash the disciples' feet. This was shocking. Foot washing was the task of the lowest servant. Masters did not wash servants' feet. Teachers did not wash students' feet. Yet here was Jesus, whom they called Lord and Teacher, kneeling before them, washing their dirty feet. Peter objected, "You shall never wash my feet." Jesus answered, "If I do not wash you, you have no share with me." Peter, in typical fashion, overreacted. "Lord, not my feet only, but also my hands and my head." Jesus explained, "The one who is bathed does not need to wash except for his feet, but is completely clean. And you are clean, but not every one of you." He knew who would betray him. When he had washed their feet and put his garments back on, he explained what he had done. "Do you understand what I have done to you? You call me teacher and Lord, and you are right, for so I am. If I then, your Lord and teacher, have washed your feet, you also ought to wash one another's feet. For I have given you an example, that you also should do just as I have done to you." The lesson was about service, humility, and love. The greatest must be the servant of all. If Jesus, their Lord, served them, they must serve one another. This was the foundation of the kingdom he was establishing. Not power over others, but service to others. Not domination, but love. As they continued eating, Jesus became troubled in spirit. He looked around at his disciples and declared, "Truly, truly, I say to you, one of you will betray me." The disciples were shocked. They looked at one another, uncertain of whom he spoke. One by one they began to ask, "Is it I, Lord?" Each was genuinely unsure, examining their own hearts. Even Judas asked, "Is it I, Rabbi?" Jesus answered him, "You have said so." Peter motioned to John, who was reclining next to Jesus, to ask who it was. John leaned back against Jesus and asked, "Lord, who is it?" Jesus answered, "It is he to whom I will give this morsel of bread when I have dipped it." He dipped the bread and gave it to Judas. Then Jesus said to him, "What you are going to do, do quickly." None of the other disciples understood why Jesus said this to him. Some thought Jesus was telling him to buy what they needed for the feast, or to give something to the poor. Judas took the morsel and immediately went out. John adds a haunting detail. And it was night. It was night in more ways than one. Darkness was descending. The hour had come. The betrayal was in motion. With Judas gone, Jesus took bread, gave thanks, broke it, and gave it to the disciples, saying, "Take, eat. This is my body which is given for you. Do this in remembrance of me." Then he took a cup of wine, gave thanks, and gave it to them, saying, "Drink of it, all of you, For this is my blood of the covenant, which is poured out for many for the forgiveness of sins." He was instituting the Lord's Supper, the communion meal that Christians would celebrate for the next 2,000 years. The bread represented his body, about to be broken. The wine represented his blood, about to be shed. This Passover meal, celebrating deliverance from Egypt, was being transformed into something new. A new covenant, a new deliverance, not from physical slavery but from sin and death. Jesus told them, "I will not drink again of this fruit of the vine until that day when I drink it new with you in my Father's kingdom." He was looking beyond the cross to the resurrection, to the kingdom, to the time when he would be reunited with them. He taught them at length. John's Gospel records 3 chapters of teaching from this night. Jesus spoke about going to prepare a place for them. He promised to come again and take them to himself. He told them he was the way, the truth, and the life. He promised to send the Holy Spirit. He commanded them to love one another as he had loved them. He warned them they would be persecuted. He prayed for them, for their unity, for their protection, for all who would believe through their message. Then they sang a hymn and went out to the Mount of Olives. On the way, Jesus warned them, "You will all fall away because of me this night. For it is written, I will strike the shepherd and the sheep of the flock will be scattered." Peter protested vehemently, "Though they all fall away because of you, I will never fall away." Jesus looked at him and said, "Truly I tell you, this very night before the rooster crows, you will deny me 3 times." Peter insisted even more strongly, "Even if I must die with you, I will not deny you." All the disciples said the same. They meant it. In that moment, they were sincere. They could not imagine betraying Jesus. But they did not yet understand their own weakness. They did not know what was coming. They came to a place called Gethsemane, an olive grove on the Mount of Olives. Jesus told 8 of the disciples, "Sit here while I go over there and pray." He took Peter, James, and John farther into the garden. He began to be sorrowful and troubled. He told them, "My soul is very sorrowful, even to death. Remain here and watch with me." He went a little farther, about a stone's throw away, fell on his face and prayed, "My Father, if it be possible, let this cup pass from me. Nevertheless, not as I will, but as you will." This was no casual prayer. Luke records that his sweat became like great drops of blood falling to the ground. This was a real agony, a genuine struggle. The cup he was facing contained the wrath of God against all human sin. He who knew no sin was about to be made sin for us. He who had eternal fellowship with the Father was about to be separated from him. The weight of this was crushing. He returned to the 3 disciples and found them sleeping. He said to Peter, "So could you not watch with me 1 hour? Watch and pray that you may not enter into temptation. The spirit indeed is willing, but the flesh is weak." He went away a second time and prayed, "My Father, if this cannot pass unless I drink it, your will be done." He returned again and found them sleeping. Their eyes were heavy. He left them and went away again and prayed for the 3rd time, saying the same words. Then he came to the disciples and said, "Sleep and take your rest later on. See, the hour is at hand, and the Son of Man is betrayed into the hands of sinners. Rise, let us be going. See, my betrayer is at hand." While he was still speaking, Judas arrived. He was leading a large crowd armed with swords and clubs sent by the chief priests and elders. Judas had arranged a signal with them. "The one I will kiss is the man. Seize him." Judas came up to Jesus and said, "Greetings, Rabbi," and kissed him. It was the ultimate act of hypocrisy, using the greeting of love and respect as the signal for betrayal. Jesus said to him, "Judas, would you betray the Son of Man with a kiss?" Then he asked the crowd, "Whom do you seek?" They answered, "Jesus of Nazareth." Jesus said, "I am he." When he said, "I am he," they drew back and fell to the ground. This was no accident. Jesus was demonstrating his power. He was not being taken against his will. He was surrendering voluntarily. He asked again, "Whom do you seek?" They said, "Jesus of Nazareth." Jesus answered, "I told you that I am he, so if you seek me, let these men go." This was to fulfill what he had said, "Of those whom you gave me, I have lost not one." Peter drew a sword and struck the high priest's servant, cutting off his right ear. The servant's name was Malchus. Jesus said, "Put your sword back into its place, for all who take the sword will perish by the sword. Do you think that I cannot appeal to my Father, and he will at once send me more than 12 legions of angels? But how then should the scriptures be fulfilled, that it must be so?" Then Jesus touched the servant's ear and healed it. Even in his arrest, he showed compassion and power. He told the crowd, "Have you come out as against a robber, with swords and clubs to capture me? Day after day I sat in the temple teaching, and you did not seize me. But all this has taken place that the scriptures of the prophets might be fulfilled." Then all the disciples left him and fled. They had promised to die with him. Now they ran to save their own lives. Even Peter, who had sworn he would never fall away, was running. The guards seized Jesus and led him away. The clock was now ticking toward his death. Less than 15 hours remained. Friday, the trials begin. It was past midnight when they brought Jesus to Annas, the father-in-law of Caiaphas, the high priest. Annas had been high priest years earlier and still wielded considerable power behind the scenes. He questioned Jesus about his disciples and his teaching. Jesus answered, "I have spoken openly to the world. I have always taught in synagogues and in the temple, where all Jews come together. I have said nothing in secret. Why do you ask me? Ask those who have heard me what I said to them. They know what I said." One of the officers standing by struck Jesus with his hand, saying, "Is that how you answer the high priest?" Jesus answered him, "If what I said is wrong, bear witness about the wrong. But if what I said is right, why do you strike me?" Annas then sent him bound to Caiaphas, the high priest. The chief priests and the whole council were seeking false testimony against Jesus that they might put him to death, but they found none. Many bore false witness against him, but their testimony did not agree. The law of Moses required at least 2 witnesses to agree for a death sentence. The council could not find even 2 who could keep their stories straight. Finally, 2 witnesses came forward and said, "This man said, 'I am able to destroy the temple of God and to rebuild it in 3 days.'" This was a distortion of what Jesus had actually said. He had spoken of his body as the temple, saying that if they destroyed it, he would raise it in 3 days. But the witnesses twisted his words to make them sound like a threat against the literal temple. Caiaphas stood up and said, "Have you no answer to make? What is it that these men testify against you?" But Jesus remained silent. He was fulfilling Isaiah 53:7. Like a lamb that is led to the slaughter, and like a sheep that before its shearers is silent, so he opened not his mouth. Then the high priest said to him, "I adjure you by the living God, tell us if you are the Christ, the Son of God." This was the moment. This was the question everything turned on. Jesus answered, "You have said so. But I tell you, from now on you will see the Son of Man seated at the right hand of power and coming on the clouds of heaven." He was claiming to be the Messiah. He was claiming to be divine. He was applying to himself the prophecy from Daniel 7 about the Son of Man coming with the clouds of heaven. He was declaring that he would be exalted to God's right hand and would return in glory. Caiaphas tore his robes and declared, "He has uttered blasphemy. What further witnesses do we need? You have now heard his blasphemy. What is your judgment?" They answered, "He deserves death." Then they spit in his face and struck him. Others slapped him, saying, "Prophesy to us, you Christ. Who is it that struck you?" They blindfolded him and beat him, mocking him. The religious leaders of Israel were abusing the Messiah they claimed to be waiting for. While this was happening inside, Peter was in the courtyard below. He had followed at a distance after fleeing from Gethsemane. He wanted to see what would happen to Jesus, but he stayed outside, trying to remain anonymous among the servants and officers warming themselves by a fire. A servant girl saw him and looked closely at him. She said, "This man also was with him." Peter denied it. "Woman, I do not know him." A little later, someone else saw him and said, "You also are one of them." Peter said, "Man, I am not." About an hour passed. Another person insisted, "Certainly this man also was with him, for he is a Galilean." Peter said, "Man, I do not know what you are talking about." Immediately, while he was still speaking, the rooster crowed. The Lord turned and looked at Peter. Peter remembered the word of the Lord, how he had said to him, "Before the rooster crows today, you will deny me 3 times." Peter went out and wept bitterly. He had meant every word of his promise. He had sincerely intended to die with Jesus. But when the moment came, fear overwhelmed faithfulness. He had denied his Lord 3 times. The shame and guilt must have been crushing. As dawn broke on Friday morning, the council assembled officially. They needed a formal decision in daylight to make the proceedings legal. They asked Jesus again, "If you are the Christ, tell us." Jesus said, "If I tell you, you will not believe, and if I ask you, you will not answer. But from now on the Son of Man shall be seated at the right hand of the power of God." They all said, "Are you the Son of God then?" Jesus answered, "You say that I am." They said, "What further testimony do we need? We have heard it ourselves from his own lips." They had their verdict. Jesus had claimed to be the Son of God. In their view, this was blasphemy deserving death. But they had a problem. Judea was under Roman occupation. The Jewish council could not execute anyone without Roman approval. They would have to take Jesus to Pilate, the Roman governor. When Judas saw that Jesus was condemned, remorse struck him. He brought the 30 pieces of silver back to the chief priests and elders, saying, "I have sinned by betraying innocent blood." They said, "What is that to us? See to it yourself." Judas threw the silver into the temple, left, and went and hanged himself. The chief priests picked up the coins and said, "It is not lawful to put them into the treasury, since it is blood money." They used the money to buy the potter's field as a burial place for strangers. Matthew notes that this fulfilled the prophecy of Jeremiah. And they took the 30 pieces of silver, the price of him on whom a price had been set by some of the sons of Israel, and they gave them for the potter's field, as the Lord directed me. The betrayer was dead, but the betrayed still lived, though not for long. Friday morning before Pilate and Herod. They led Jesus from the house of Caiaphas to the governor's headquarters. It was early morning. The Jewish leaders would not enter the headquarters themselves because entering a Gentile building would make them ceremonially unclean for Passover. The irony was thick. They were scrupulous about ritual purity while murdering the Son of God. Pontius Pilate came out to them and asked, "What accusation do you bring against this man?" They answered, "If this man were not doing evil, we would not have delivered him over to you." Pilate said, "Take him yourselves and judge him by your own law." The Jews said, "It is not lawful for us to put anyone to death." They needed Roman authority to execute Jesus. John notes that this was to fulfill what Jesus had said about the kind of death he was going to die. Crucifixion was a Roman method. If the Jews had executed him, it would have been by stoning. But prophecy declared the Messiah would be pierced. His hands and feet would be wounded. Crucifixion, not stoning, would fulfill these prophecies. They began to accuse him. "We found this man misleading our nation and forbidding us to give tribute to Caesar, and saying that he himself is Christ, a king." These were lies. Jesus had never forbidden paying taxes to Caesar. He had actually said to render to Caesar what was Caesar's. But the Jewish leaders knew religious charges would not matter to Pilate. They needed political charges. So they accused Jesus of rebellion against Rome. Pilate went back inside and summoned Jesus. He asked him, "Are you the king of the Jews?" Jesus answered, "Do you say this of your own accord? Or did others say it to you about me?" Pilate replied, "Am I a Jew? Your own nation and the chief priests have delivered you over to me. What have you done?" Jesus answered, "My kingdom is not of this world. If my kingdom were of this world, my servants would have been fighting that I might not be delivered over to the Jews, but my kingdom is not from the world." Pilate said, "So you are a king?" Jesus answered, "You say that I am a king. For this purpose I was born, and for this purpose I have come into the world, to bear witness to the truth. Everyone who is of the truth listens to my voice." Pilate asked, "What is truth?" It was a cynical question from a man who had spent years in politics and power. He did not wait for an answer, but went back outside to the Jewish leaders and announced, "I find no guilt in him." The chief priests and elders were indignant. They insisted, "He stirs up the people, teaching throughout all Judea, from Galilee even to this place." When Pilate heard mention of Galilee, he asked if Jesus was a Galilean. Learning that he was from Herod's jurisdiction, Pilate saw a way to avoid making a decision. He sent Jesus to Herod Antipas, who happened to be in Jerusalem for the Passover festival. Herod was glad to see Jesus. He had been wanting to meet him for a long time. He had heard about him and was hoping to see him perform some sign. He questioned Jesus at length, but Jesus made no answer. The chief priests and scribes stood there, vehemently accusing him. Herod and his soldiers treated Jesus with contempt and mocked him. They put an elegant robe on him and sent him back to Pilate. Luke notes that Herod and Pilate became friends that day. Before this, they had been at enmity with each other. The mockery of Jesus brought them together. Pilate called together the chief priests, the rulers, and the people. He told them, "You brought me this man as one who was misleading the people, and after examining him before you, behold, I did not find this man guilty of any of your charges against him. Neither did Herod, for he sent him back to us. Look, nothing deserving death has been done by him. I will therefore punish and release him." Pilate's plan was to have Jesus flogged and then let him go. The flogging would satisfy the Jewish leaders' desire to see him punished, but it would not kill him. It seemed like a compromise. But the crowd had other ideas. At the feast, it was the governor's custom to release one prisoner whom the crowd wanted. There was a notorious prisoner named Barabbas, who had been arrested for insurrection and murder. Pilate asked them, "Whom do you want me to release for you, Barabbas, or Jesus who is called Christ?" Pilate knew they had delivered Jesus out of envy. While he was sitting on the judgment seat, his wife sent word to him, "Have nothing to do with that righteous man, for I have suffered much because of him today in a dream." Even Pilate's pagan wife recognized something special about Jesus. But the chief priests and elders persuaded the crowd to ask for Barabbas and destroy Jesus. When Pilate asked again, "Which of the two do you want me to release for you?" they shouted, "Barabbas." Pilate said, "Then what shall I do with Jesus who is called Christ?" They all said, "Let him be crucified." Pilate asked, "Why? What evil has he done?" But they shouted all the more, "Let him be crucified." The mob mentality had taken over. The same crowds that had welcomed Jesus into Jerusalem just 5 days earlier, shouting Hosanna, were now shouting Crucify. The religious leaders had done their work well, turning the people against Jesus. Friday mid-morning, the flogging and mockery. Pilate, seeing he was getting nowhere and that a riot was beginning, took water and washed his hands before the crowd, saying, "I am innocent of this man's blood. See to it yourselves." The people answered, "His blood be on us and on our children." Pilate released Barabbas, the murderer and insurrectionist. He had Jesus flogged and delivered him over to be crucified. Roman flogging was a horrific punishment. The victim was stripped and tied to a post. Soldiers used a flagellum, a whip with multiple leather strands, each embedded with pieces of bone and metal. The whip tore through skin, muscle, and tissue. Many victims died from flogging alone. Those who survived were often left barely alive, their backs shredded, their bodies in shock. Isaiah had prophesied about the Messiah's suffering. "As many were astonished at you, his appearance was so marred, beyond human semblance, and his form beyond that of the children of mankind." The flogging fulfilled this prophecy. Jesus was beaten until he barely looked human. But the physical torture was not enough for the soldiers. They twisted together a crown of thorns and put it on his head. They put a purple robe on him, mocking his claim to be a king. They came up to him and said, "Hail, King of the Jews," and struck him with their hands. They spit on him. They took a reed and struck him on the head, driving the thorns deeper into his scalp. Pilate brought Jesus out, wearing the crown of thorns and the purple robe, and said to the crowd, "Behold the man." Perhaps Pilate thought the sight of Jesus so brutally beaten would satisfy the crowd's bloodlust. But when the chief priests and officers saw him, they cried out, "Crucify him! Crucify him!" Pilate said, "Take him yourselves and crucify him, for I find no guilt in him." The Jews answered, "We have a law, and according to that law he ought to die because he has made himself the Son of God." When Pilate heard this, he was even more afraid. He went back into his headquarters and asked Jesus, "Where are you from?" But Jesus gave no answer. Pilate said, You will not speak to me? Do you not know that I have authority to release you and authority to crucify you?" Jesus answered, "You would have no authority over me at all, unless it had been given you from above. Therefore, he who delivered me over to you has the greater sin." Pilate sought to release him, but the Jews cried out, "If you release this man, you are not Caesar's friend. Everyone who makes himself a king opposes Caesar." This was the threat that broke Pilate's resistance. To be accused of not being Caesar's friend, to be reported as tolerating rebellion, could cost Pilate his position or even his life. Political survival won out over justice. Pilate brought Jesus out and sat down on the judgment seat at a place called the Stone Pavement, in Aramaic Gabbatha. It was now about the 6th hour, around noon. Pilate said to the Jews, "Behold your king." They cried out, "Away with him! Away with him! Crucify him!" Pilate said, "Shall I crucify your king?" The chief priests answered, "We have no king but Caesar." This was the ultimate rejection. Israel's religious leaders, who claimed to serve the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, who waited for the Messiah promised by the prophets, declared their only king was Caesar, a pagan emperor who claimed to be divine. They rejected God's Son in favor of Rome's emperor. Pilate handed Jesus over to be crucified. Friday afternoon, the crucifixion. The soldiers took charge of Jesus. They forced him to carry his own cross, or at least the horizontal crossbeam, which would weigh 75 to 125 pounds. In his weakened condition, after the flogging and beating, this was nearly impossible. They led him out to be crucified. A large crowd followed, including women who were mourning and lamenting for him. Jesus turned to them and said, "Daughters of Jerusalem, do not weep for me, but weep for yourselves and for your children. For behold, the days are coming when they will say, 'Blessed are the barren and the wombs that never bore and the breasts that never nursed.' Then they will begin to say to the mountains, 'Fall on us,' and to the hills, 'Cover us.' For if they do these things when the wood is green, what will happen when it is dry?" He was prophesying Jerusalem's coming destruction. If the Romans did this to him, the innocent one, what would they do to the guilty city when judgment came? As they were going out, they found a man of Cyrene, Simon by name, and forced him to carry Jesus' cross. Jesus was too weak to carry it all the way. They brought him to the place called Golgotha, which means the place of a skull. It was a hill outside the city walls, probably named for its skull-like appearance. This was where Rome executed criminals, where crosses stood as warnings to anyone who might challenge imperial authority. They offered Jesus wine mixed with myrrh, a mild painkiller, but when he tasted it, he would not drink it. He would face death fully conscious, experiencing every moment of suffering. It was 9 in the morning when they crucified him. Crucifixion was Rome's most brutal method of execution, designed for maximum pain and public humiliation. The victim was stripped naked. Nails were driven through the wrists and feet. The cross was raised and the victim was left to hang, slowly suffocating as his body weight pulled down on his chest. Death could take hours or even days. They crucified 2 robbers with Jesus, one on his right and one on his left. Jesus hung between 2 criminals, fulfilling Isaiah's prophecy that he would be numbered with the transgressors. Pilate had an inscription written and put on the cross. It read, "Jesus of Nazareth, the King of the Jews," written in Aramaic, Latin, and Greek. The chief priests protested to Pilate, "Do not write the King of the Jews, but rather, 'This man said, I am King of the Jews.'" Pilate answered, "What I have written, I have written." The inscription stood. Above the dying Jesus was the declaration of his true identity, whether people believed it or not. The soldiers who had crucified him divided his garments among them by casting lots. This fulfilled Psalm 22:18. "They divide my garments among them, and for my clothing they cast lots." People passing by derided him, wagging their heads and saying, "You who would destroy the temple and rebuild it in 3 days, save yourself. If you are the Son of God, come down from the cross." The chief priests, scribes, and elders mocked him. "He saved others. He cannot save himself. He is the King of Israel. Let him come down now from the cross, and we will believe in him. He trusts in God. Let God deliver him now, if he desires him." For he said, I am the Son of God. They did not understand. He could have come down from the cross. He had power to do so. But if he saved himself, he could not save humanity. The reason he did not come down was because he loved them, even those mocking him. He was dying in their place, bearing the punishment for their sins. Even one of the robbers crucified with him joined in the mocking, but the other rebuked him. Do you not fear God, since you are under the same sentence of condemnation? And we indeed justly, for we are receiving the due reward of our deeds, but this man has done nothing wrong. Then he said, Jesus, remember me when you come into your kingdom. Jesus answered him, Truly I say to you, today you will be with me in paradise. In his final hours, Jesus was still saving people. This criminal, who could do nothing to earn salvation, who had no time to reform his life or perform good works, was saved by simple faith. He recognized who Jesus was, asked to be remembered, and received the promise of paradise. Standing by the cross were Jesus' mother Mary, her sister, Mary the wife of Clopas, and Mary Magdalene. John, the beloved disciple, was also there. When Jesus saw his mother and the disciple he loved standing nearby, he said to his mother, Woman, behold your son. Then he said to the disciple, Behold your mother. From that hour, John took Mary into his own home. Even in his agony, Jesus was caring for his mother's future. At noon, darkness came over the whole land until 3 p.m. This was not an eclipse. Passover occurred during a full moon, when eclipses are impossible. This was supernatural darkness, created by God, a sign of the cosmic significance of what was happening. The light of the world was dying, and creation itself went dark. About 3 p.m, Jesus cried out with a loud voice, Eli, Eli, lema sabachthani, which means, my God, why have you forsaken me? He was quoting Psalm 22:1, a messianic psalm that described his suffering in detail. But he was also experiencing the reality behind those words. God the Father was turning away from God the Son. Why? Because Jesus was bearing the sins of the world. He was becoming sin for us. The Father, who cannot look upon sin, was forsaking the Son. This was the heart of the gospel. Jesus was experiencing separation from God so that we would never have to. He was drinking the cup of God's wrath so that we could drink the cup of salvation. He was being forsaken so that we could be accepted. Some standing there misunderstood, thinking he was calling for Elijah. One of them ran and filled a sponge with sour wine, put it on a reed, and gave it to him to drink. After this, knowing that all was now finished, Jesus said, I thirst. This fulfilled another prophecy from Psalm 69:21. For my thirst they gave me sour wine to drink. Then Jesus said, It is finished. The Greek word is tetelestai, which means paid in full. It was a term used when a debt was completely paid. The work of redemption was complete. The price for human sin had been paid in full. The way to God was now open. Then Jesus cried out with a loud voice, Father, into your hands I commit my spirit. Having said this, he breathed his last. The Son of God was dead. At that moment, the curtain of the temple was torn in two, from top to bottom. This curtain separated the holy place from the Holy of Holies, where God's presence dwelled. Only the high priest could enter, and only once a year on the Day of Atonement. The tearing of this curtain from top to bottom, an act only God could do, symbolized that the way to God was now open. No more barriers, no more separation. Through Jesus' death, all could come directly to God. The earth shook, rocks were split, tombs were opened, and many bodies of the saints who had fallen asleep were raised. After Jesus' resurrection, they came out of the tombs, entered the holy city, and appeared to many. When the centurion and those with him, keeping watch over Jesus, saw the earthquake and what took place, they were filled with awe and said, Truly, this was the Son of God. Even this pagan Roman soldier recognized what the religious leaders refused to see. Many women were there, watching from a distance. They had followed Jesus from Galilee, ministering to him. Among them were Mary Magdalene, Mary the mother of James and Joseph, and the mother of the sons of Zebedee. The male disciples had fled, but these women remained faithful to the end. Because it was the day of preparation, and the Sabbath was about to begin, The Jews asked Pilate that the legs of the crucified men be broken and that they be taken away. Breaking the legs would hasten death, preventing the victim from pushing up to breathe. The soldiers came and broke the legs of the two robbers, but when they came to Jesus and saw that he was already dead, they did not break his legs. Instead, one of the soldiers pierced his side with a spear, and at once there came out blood and water. John, who witnessed this, testified that it was true. The unbroken legs fulfilled Exodus 12:46 about the Passover lamb. You shall not break any of its bones. The piercing fulfilled Zechariah 12:10. They will look on me, on him whom they have pierced. Friday evening, the burial. A rich man from Arimathea named Joseph, who was also a disciple of Jesus, went to Pilate and asked for the body of Jesus. Joseph was a member of the council, a good and righteous man who had not consented to their decision and action. He had been waiting for the kingdom of God. Pilate was surprised that Jesus was already dead. He summoned the centurion and asked whether Jesus had already died. When he learned from the centurion that it was so, he granted the corpse to Joseph. Nicodemus, the one who had come to Jesus by night earlier in his ministry, also came. He brought a mixture of myrrh and aloes, about 75 pounds. They took the body of Jesus and wrapped it in linen cloths with the spices, as was the burial custom of the Jews. In the place where Jesus was crucified, there was a garden, and in the garden a new tomb in which no one had yet been laid. Joseph had cut this tomb for himself out of the rock. Because it was the day of preparation and the tomb was close at hand, they laid Jesus there. They rolled a great stone to the entrance of the tomb and departed. Mary Magdalene and Mary the mother of Joseph saw where he was laid. The next day, Saturday the Sabbath, the chief priests and Pharisees gathered before Pilate. They said, "Sir, we remember how that impostor said while he was still alive, 'After 3 days I will rise.' Therefore order the tomb to be made secure until the third day, lest his disciples go and steal him away and tell the people, 'He has risen from the dead,' and the last fraud will be worse than the first." Pilate said to them, "You have a guard of soldiers. Go, make it as secure as you can." They went and made the tomb secure by sealing the stone and setting a guard. Jesus was dead, buried, guarded. His followers were scattered, hiding in fear. His enemies thought they had won. The great threat was eliminated. The movement would die. Everything would return to normal. They could not have been more wrong. The greatest victory in history was about to unfold. Friday was not the end. Sunday was coming. Sunday morning, the resurrection. Saturday passed slowly. The disciples hid behind locked doors, afraid the authorities would come for them next. The women who had followed Jesus rested according to the commandment, waiting for the Sabbath to end so they could properly anoint his body. Sunday morning, very early, while it was still dark, Mary Magdalene, Mary the mother of James, and Salome bought spices and went to the tomb. They were saying to one another, "Who will roll away the stone for us from the entrance of the tomb?" It was a large stone, too heavy for them to move. As dawn was breaking, there was a great earthquake. An angel of the Lord descended from heaven, came and rolled back the stone and sat on it. His appearance was like lightning, and his clothing white as snow. The guards trembled and became like dead men out of fear. When the women arrived, they found the stone already rolled away. The tomb was open. They entered but did not find the body of the Lord Jesus. While they were perplexed about this, behold, 2 men stood by them in dazzling apparel. The women were frightened and bowed their faces to the ground. The angels said to them, "Why do you seek the living among the dead? He is not here, but has risen. Remember how he told you while he was still in Galilee, that the Son of Man must be delivered into the hands of sinful men and be crucified and on the third day rise." The women remembered his words. The angels continued, "Go quickly and tell his disciples that he has risen from the dead, and behold, he is going before you to Galilee. There you will see him." The women departed quickly from the tomb with fear and great joy. They ran to tell his disciples. But Mary Magdalene went to Simon Peter and John and told them. They have taken the Lord out of the tomb, and we do not know where they have laid him." Peter and John ran to the tomb. John, being younger, outran Peter and reached the tomb first. Stooping to look in, he saw the linen cloths lying there, but he did not go in. Peter came following him and went into the tomb. He saw the linen cloths lying there, and the face cloth, which had been on Jesus' head, not lying with the linen cloths, but folded up in a place by itself. Then John also went in. He saw and believed, for as yet they did not understand the scripture, that he must rise from the dead. They went back to their homes, marveling at what had happened. Mary Magdalene stood weeping outside the tomb. As she wept, she stooped to look into the tomb and saw 2 angels in white, sitting where the body of Jesus had lain, one at the head and one at the feet. They said to her, "Woman, why are you weeping?" She said, "They have taken away my Lord, and I do not know where they have laid him." Having said this, she turned around and saw Jesus standing, but she did not recognize him. Jesus said to her, "Woman, why are you weeping? Whom are you seeking?" Supposing him to be the gardener, she said, "Sir, if you have carried him away, tell me where you have laid him, and I will take him away." Jesus said to her, "Mary." She turned and said to him in Aramaic, "Rabboni," which means teacher. She recognized his voice. Her Lord was alive. Jesus said to her, "Do not cling to me, for I have not yet ascended to the Father. But go to my brothers and say to them, I am ascending to my Father and your Father, to my God and your God." Mary Magdalene went and announced to the disciples, "I have seen the Lord," and she told them that he had said these things to her. Meanwhile, the other women were also going to tell the disciples. Jesus met them and said, "Greetings." They came up and took hold of his feet and worshipped him. Jesus said to them, "Do not be afraid. Go and tell my brothers to go to Galilee, and there they will see me." While the women were going, some of the guard went into the city and told the chief priests all that had taken place. The priests assembled with the elders and devised a plan. They gave a sufficient sum of money to the soldiers and said, "Tell people, his disciples came by night and stole him away while we were asleep. And if this comes to the governor's ears, we will satisfy him and keep you out of trouble." The soldiers took the money and did as they were directed. This story spread among the Jews and was still being told when Matthew wrote his gospel decades later. That same day, 2 disciples were going to a village named Emmaus, about 7 miles from Jerusalem. They were talking about all that had happened. While they were talking, Jesus himself drew near and went with them, but their eyes were kept from recognizing him. He asked them, "What is this conversation that you are holding with each other as you walk?" They stood still, looking sad. One of them, named Cleopas, answered him, "Are you the only visitor to Jerusalem who does not know the things that have happened there in these days?" He said, "What things?" They said, "Concerning Jesus of Nazareth, a man who was a prophet mighty in deed and word before God and all the people, and how our chief priests and rulers delivered him up to be condemned to death and crucified him. But we had hoped that he was the one to redeem Israel. Yes, and besides all this, it is now the 3rd day since these things happened. Moreover, some women of our company amazed us. They were at the tomb early in the morning, and when they did not find his body, they came back saying that they had even seen a vision of angels, who said that he was alive. Some of those who were with us went to the tomb and found it just as the women had said, but him they did not see." Jesus said to them, "O foolish ones, and slow of heart to believe all that the prophets have spoken. Was it not necessary that the Christ should suffer these things and enter into his glory?" Beginning with Moses and all the prophets, he interpreted to them in all the scriptures the things concerning himself. He showed them how the entire Old Testament pointed to him, how the law and the prophets had predicted the Messiah's suffering and resurrection. As they drew near to the village, Jesus acted as if he were going farther, but they urged him, "Stay with us, for it is toward evening and the day is now far spent." So he went in to stay with them. When he was at table with them, he took the bread, blessed and broke it, and gave it to them. Their eyes were opened, and they recognized him. Then he vanished from their sight. They said to each other, "Did not our hearts burn within us while he talked to us on the road while he opened to us the scriptures. They rose that same hour and returned to Jerusalem. They found the 11 and those with them gathered together, saying, "The Lord has risen indeed and has appeared to Simon." Then the two told what had happened on the road and how he was known to them in the breaking of the bread. As they were talking about these things, Jesus himself stood among them and said to them, "Peace to you." They were startled and frightened and thought they saw a spirit. Jesus said to them, "Why are you troubled, and why do doubts arise in your hearts? See my hands and my feet, that it is I myself. Touch me and see. For a spirit does not have flesh and bones, as you see that I have." When he had said this, he showed them his hands and his feet. They still disbelieved for joy and were marveling. He said to them, "Have you anything here to eat?" They gave him a piece of broiled fish, and he took it and ate before them. He was proving that he was not a ghost or spirit. He had a physical, resurrected body. He could be touched, he could eat. He was truly alive. The week that changed everything. 8 days, from Sunday to Sunday, from triumph to tragedy to triumph, from hosannas to crucifixion to resurrection. In those 8 days, the course of human history changed forever. God became man. The Creator entered his creation. The immortal died. The innocent bore the guilt of the guilty. Justice and mercy met at the cross. Death was defeated. The tomb was emptied. Salvation was accomplished. The disciples who had fled in fear on Friday would soon proclaim this message boldly. They would be beaten, imprisoned, and martyred for their testimony. They would never recant. Why? Because they knew what they had seen. Jesus was alive. Death had been conquered. The gospel was true. The final days of Jesus were not the end but the beginning. The cross was not defeat but victory. The tomb was not a grave but a doorway to eternal life. Jesus said, "I am the resurrection and the life. Whoever believes in me, though he die, yet shall he live, and everyone who lives and believes in me shall never die." This is what really happened in the final days of Jesus. Not a myth, not a legend, not a symbol, but history. Real events, real suffering, real death, and real resurrection. The question is not what happened. The gospel writers recorded it clearly. The question is what we will do with what happened. Will we believe? Will we trust in the one who died for us and rose again? Will we follow the one who conquered death? That is the question these 8 days pose to every person who hears the story. And it is the most important question anyone will ever face.